there, I'm Dr. Yen, and for the next couple weeks, I'm going to be sharing some of my most favorite things to use in the classroom, as well as at home with your students. So in today's edition of That's Why, I am going to show you KEVA blocks, which are so fun to use. So welcome to today's edition of That's Why. Okay, so KEVA blocks are just these pieces of wood, and they come in several different sets and several different designs. You can get them for different age groups. They come in a handy dandy little kit like this, and you also have cards for how to build these different structures. Now, the thing I really like about KEVA blocks is that these are puzzles. So for example, you can see here, this is a puzzle that shows different angles for how to build a certain structure. So you take a look at this, you build it, and then in the back is the actual solution of what it looks like. However, that's not the point, the solution. The point is that every block has kind of these examples of what each side should look like. So it's color-coded, but it's also got a diagram, right? So any of you that have ever constructed IKEA furniture, you totally understand what I'm talking about, how you can take a two-dimensional structure and then have to build it in 3D, right, with these blocks. And they're really great for that because they balance out really well, as you can see. So when you're building these kinds of blocks, you follow the diagram, or you try and interpret the diagram into a three-dimensional structure. Now, what I wanted to do for kind of sharing my favorite things is to go through kind of a set procedure for it. So I actually decided to use my handy-dandy clipboard. I use a clipboard because then things don't get lost in piles. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about with KEVA blocks is the kinds of learning that happen with using blocks like this. And the first one is recontextualization. Okay, I talk about recontextualization a lot because this is a great way to get really deep learning happening in something that is so simple as wooden blocks and a toy. Now, recontextualization is about taking information from one mode. For instance, taking information from a text, or a picture, or a video, right? We're taking that information, interpreting it, and then recontextualizing it, moving that information into a different form or interpretation. When you can have your students recontextualize information, that act of moving information from one modality, like text or a drawing, into another modality, a three-dimensional structure that you build, you create some deep, meaningful learning from that, and you are having your students process mentally how you can actually take that information and move it from one modality to the other. So that's recontextualization. And if you didn't get that in the first run, totally fine, because you will totally understand it in some of the other things that I will be sharing too. Now, in addition to recontextualizing, okay, which is one of my favorite ways of getting students to learn things, is spatial learning. Spatial learning meaning having the ability to take a diagram like this and then think about it from multiple different angles, right? So it's the 3D spatial picturing of those things in your mind. Like, how can you take an object, close your eyes, and then picture it from different angles? That's the spatiality. And while it's a very powerful way of mentally thinking about certain things and structures, it's difficult to actually lecture about it or teach about it. It's much easier to do when you have structures like this that you can manipulate three-dimensionally. So spatiality, great way of having students have opportunities to practice mentally picturing things in their minds in a 3D way, okay? The other thing I like about this is cause and effect and systems. Now this comes from the science and engineering practices that are found in the Next Generation Science Standards. For teachers, that means a lot. For parents, not so much, except the fact that this is actually teaching you a couple skills about science and engineering. Systems are about how small parts make a greater whole of things, right? So being very deliberate about how you take small parts and build larger things into systems is this kind of learning that I'm talking about right here, system. So for example, if you take a look at that picture right now, and it's several different ways of representing it, that's the spatiality part. But then when you actually build it into this structure called a shed, this whole thing is a system. It's a working thing that actually functions for something, right? Although technically it doesn't. This is actually just a 3D model of something, which is also something very valuable for kids to learn, modeling, but I digress. The other thing we talk about with this is cause and effect. You're going to have students, you're going to have children that are probably going to build these things and feel a little frustrated because maybe their coordination is not so good, right? That frustration is actually a good thing. To have students experience frustration and then help them work through that frustration is a very valuable skill that sometimes I wish adults would actually get too. But in any case, we can still give it to our children, right? When they fail, how do we get them to think about that failure, reflect on that failure, and then do it better until they succeed? That's a very powerful teaching event, but it is also a very valuable 21st century skill. How do we recover from failure? So if you have students that creates a balanced object like this, right? Cause and effect happens when I take this away and the thing falls down. That's something we ask about. If you want to teach cause and effect for students, you ask things like, what happens if I take a block away? What happens if I take a particular block away? How would you predict what happens from that? Why do you think it happens that way? Can we test those things? That's how we get into the crux of cause and effect. Now, okay, so the next thing I want to talk about are these 21st century skills. In elementary school, they are boiled down into 4 things, which I actually really like because it's so simple. Critical thinking, creating, communicating, and collaborating, okay? What are 21st century skills? These are the soft skills that people need in order to prepare them for the workforce. Now, this makes sense, right? Like, if you think about wanting to hire somebody, you really hope that they have the ability to think critically about the things that they're doing. You want them to be able to create things like solutions to problems that come up, right? You want them to be able to communicate properly. For example, I know of students who write emails like they text sometimes, and you think to yourself, why can't they communicate professionally? Maybe it's because nobody taught them. And then collaborating is also an important skill. We agree? We need to actually teach people how to collaborate. So how do KEVA blocks actually hit those 21st century skills, you might ask? Well, here's the thing. When you work forward, when you encourage your student to build something using these challenge cards, this is a form of critical thinking, right? Because they have to think critically about what sides are being used, what structures, what colors, right? This is the recontextualization bit that I talked about before. When you have students recontextualize, you're having them practice critical thinking. Sorry, dog was distracting me. Anyways, here's the other thing. How do you get to creating, communicating, and collaborating? You bring this up to, I love calling it this, boss level. Here's what I mean by that. It's one way to take something that somebody did, like the company that creates these brain builder KEVA blocks, and then have students interpret the diagram and then build it from the blocks, right? But if we want boss level thinking, which is about, the creating, the communicating, and the collaborating, we have to go backwards. This is what I mean. You have your student create whatever it is, create it originally. Tell them, take the blocks and build something from it, right? Okay, when you do that, you're having them create from anew. This is not somebody else's thing that they're creating. They're creating this from their brains, right? They're creating something original and new. It's a 3D structure, that they create that is new and unusual and who knows, but it's, I'm gonna put this back. It's creative because it comes from their own mind. Now, you may think to yourself, okay, well, this is a basic child skill when they do building blocks and they're creating houses and they're creating structures and things. Yes, that is the case. But how you get it to boss level is then you push on how do they communicate that to somebody else. This is what I mean. How would you have a student who's created this be able to create the plans, the drawing, to give it to somebody else to recreate what they started, what they built? That's the boss level. Boss level is saying, all right, daughter, son, nephew, grandchild, now that you've created this, I would like you on a blank sheet of paper to now draw this in 2 dimensions. Make me a drawing like your cards that you're used to, and then color it accordingly so that somebody else, remember this reference card? Color it accordingly so that somebody else can take that and be able to recreate it. Now you've got boss level, because now you're having your student think about taking this and then communicating it to somebody else and also collaborating, right? Part of collaboration is the ability to communicate what somebody's thinking, what somebody's built into something else. Okay, so that's boss level. That's going in reverse. But it's a great way of having your student be able to create something, maybe take a picture of it, maybe create something on paper and then share it with another family member. Maybe that's Skype time with a grandparent, right? Is that, they say, okay, I made this from KEVA blocks. I'm sending you a set of those KEVA blocks, and my challenge to you is to recreate what I just built based on this picture that I drew and sent to you. So that is one way of getting to boss level. Now, here's some other questions that you can ask your student in order to get to these 4 things on 21st century skills. I'm going to just list them, and you can be inspired by some of these questions that you may ask. For example, critical thinking is about consciously thinking about one's building process and consciously being aware of why somebody is building things in a certain way. For example, if a student starts with planks that go like this, I know I keep building the same structure, and then they put one on top, you can ask your student, your child, what was the process for them to create something like this? What does this block do? What would happen if I removed that block, right? How would I go about creating something, a tower that's bigger than this? What would I need to use? Now, for students that are young children, what you can ask is, what's the highest structure that I can create with 5 blocks? What's the highest structure that I can create with 10 blocks? Or you can ask, build me the highest structure with these KEVA blocks. Tell me how many blocks it was. Why don't you count them, right? These are ways of not only incorporating process, but also incorporating some of the math involved, right? How many blocks did you use? Let's measure how high it was. Let's think about, can you think about how you can make this even higher, right? Maybe they go through a few of these KEVA cards, these cards where they build things, and then you can ask, what did you learn by building some of these structures that maybe you didn't know before? There's critical thinking. Being able to ask questions to make them more aware of the building process that they're doing, okay? Let's talk about communicating, and there's so many different ways to communicate. Obviously, when you're asking them the critical thinking questions, their answers are a part of that communication. Having a discussion about what they're building is all part of that communication, right? But communication can also be, how would I be able to communicate this structure to somebody else? What are different modes of doing that? How would I be able to tell somebody else about what I did? Now, your student may say, let's take a picture. That's a great way of communicating, right? Let's make a video. There's another way. Let's build this out of clay. Let's draw it. These are all different ways that your student can communicate. Now, here's the catch-22. As a QP, a key person meaning person that is involved in your student's learning, especially now in distance learning, right? You could be a parent, you could be a grandparent, a relative, a friend, whoever it is that is helping that student learn. You're not the person that's suggesting that communication. In order to get a student to think critically and to learn and to think about communication, you're guiding them into thinking about these different modes. But you're not the one telling them that. You want to be able to encourage your student to do it for themselves, and then encourage them when that communication comes out. Maybe it can be from something completely different. Maybe you're watching TV together and you're seeing how somebody is explaining something on a video. So then you can say, how is that person communicating that information to you? And I wonder if you can take that how, and repeat it for some of the things that you're doing, right? There's communication. The other thing too is, let's connect this with language arts. Tell me a story about the structure that you built. Maybe your student created a house. Tell me a story about a character who lives in that house, right? Create the story about it. Create a character about it. Maybe you create a whole village from these KEVA blocks. So that's a part of that communication as well. Now here's collaborating, and this helps a lot when you have siblings, right? So together with you and your sibling, create a house. What did your brother contribute to it? What did your sister contribute to it? How did you work with your brother and sister on doing this? That's collaboration, which brings up another story. Minecraft, I don't know if a lot of you are involved in Minecraft, is a wonderful place for students to learn when they're building structures together. And I just think about collaboration because my eldest son would build these really elaborate structures, and then when my youngest son was younger, he was into destroying them. So he would unleash the Ender Dragon on my eldest son's castle, and that would not be a great form of collaboration, but at the same time I found it incredibly amusing that he would unleash the Ender Dragon on some of these things. So creating, we talked about before. How do you build things? And tell me about them, right? Tell me about what you've created. Maybe it's a challenge to create certain things, and I've already shared creating a house, creating a tall structure, creating maybe some of these things. How do you create this I don't know, this butterfly in a different way than what you see here, right? We talk about collaboration, critical thinking, and communication. So I think I've got them all covered, but if you had any questions about using KEVA blocks in another way, feel free to put them in the comments and I will definitely respond. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of That's Why. Stay tuned for some of the other little toys and some of my other favorite things that I like to use to help people learn. So until next time, take care everybody, and I will see you soon. Bye.